And we are live. Michael, welcome to LinkedIn Heroes. We're broadcasting across Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. If you're tuning in, drop into the comments and say hello. We want to make this as interactive as possible. We'll take questions from the audience as we go. Michael was recommended to be on the series by my mother, who came across you through the Rotary and said, this young guy's doing a million and one things to make the world a better place. And I started reading your LinkedIn profile and just thought, wow, geez, this guy's accomplished so much, in such a young age. A lot of the audience are young entrepreneurs, business owners, a lot of marketing leaders. And I think your story, first of all, will be extremely inspirational. And we're keen to learn, some of the things you learned along the way. You've worked with a lot of exciting celebrities. You're just telling me a story about working with John Legend while you were still at UWA. But to begin, I'm curious, what sort of kid were you? Like, if we were friends at, say, 10 years old, who was Michael Scheldrick then?
Very, very dorky and shy, I would say. It's funny. I've been asked this a few times. And I think back to the kid I was at the start of high school. I was very shy and I wasn't doing particularly well at high school. I was actually ranked in the bottom of the class. I remember my teacher showing my mum a chart and I was ranked down here. And I was very clumsy as well. I was that kid who wasn't good at any sport. And I would be so petrified whenever we went to play team sport. I thought, I'm going to do something stupid. And because I'm thinking about it so much, I would go to kick the footy ball. And of course, it would fly in the opposite direction. You probably wouldn't think I would be doing what I would be doing now. And a lot of people didn't. I still remember someone overhearing someone saying, Michael's probably not going to get into university, probably not going to go to college, do all these things. He'd probably leave, get straight into work. So if you had met me, maybe your expectations of me wouldn't have been all that high, maybe.
Wow. That's phenomenal. So, what changed along the way? Because you obviously did well at school to get into UWA. You studied law, and started getting involved in business at a very young age. What inspired you to do that? Do you think?
So I had a teacher, and I think even to this day, the power of education and not just education in the formal sense, like learning information and stuff, but actually teachers taking an active interest. In year 8, so I went to Clarkson Community High School, which, for those not from Perth, it's up in Perth's northern suburbs. And about halfway through school, I did this assignment, in-class assignment. And did you ever watch the movie Gladiator? It came out with Russell Crowe.
Yeah, love that movie.
Yeah, no, great film, and I loved it too. And I loved history as a kid, and we did this in-class assignment, and I did it on Roman gladiators. And at the end of the class, walked out, got home, and I remember my mum, when I walked into the house that day, she had this confused look on her face. And she said, Michael, there's a message for you on the answer machine. So I played it, and it was this year 8 teacher, Mr. Byrne. And he basically said, hi, Mrs. Sheldrick, I've noticed a change in Michael. Can you give me a call back? And I thought, well, that's a strange, creepy message. What have I done wrong? And basically she said, Mr. Byrne rang to say that I had topped the class in this assignment on gladiators, and he wanted to see me the next day. And I saw him the next day, and he said, look, I think there's more to you than meets the eye. And I remember just asking him, do you really think I could be the top kid in school? Because that's what he seemed to be suggesting. And he said, I think if you work hard, I think you can do anything. And he challenged me, and he said, if you need extra time, I will work with you, review work. And I remember thinking it was one of the first times in my life where I had this sense of aspiration, where I was like, okay, what the heck, may as well give it a go. And I remember the second last day of the semester, before school ended, Mr. Byrne drove to our house, and he was walking down the driveway, and I thought, why are you here, Mr. Byrne? And he said, I couldn't wait until tomorrow. I've just crunched the numbers. And he gave me this certificate with a number 1 on it. And, I will always be grateful to him, because I think that was genuinely a fork in the road. And just grateful for the opportunities that growing up in Australia allows you to have a teacher like Mr. Byrne. And to this day, one of my constant motivating factors is there must be millions of kids in the world with great potential, but because they don't have access maybe to a great teacher like Mr. Byrne, or because of lack of access to a cheap vaccine, they don't survive to their 5th birthday, and for me, it's how do we expand that opportunity to give everyone the chance to achieve their potential. That was really at the heart of my motivation behind joining and helping to grow Global Citizen.
Wow, what a story. Are you still in touch with Mr. Byrne?
I should reach out to him on one of these trips when I'm back. I did. He heard about this story, or his mum heard about it. And shortly before I moved from Perth, I got to meet him when I was Young Western Australian of the Year, and I got to say, you played a key role in having this. But I feel like we don't thank our teachers enough, and it would be great to catch up with him again, and should do that. And anyone listening who's had a great teacher should, I think, take the time to do that.
Yeah. That's very interesting. And so you're at UWA. You're studying law, and I think it was arts as well. How did Global Citizen, the opportunity to get involved with the partners that you had in Melbourne, come about?
So, I had been fundraising, building schools in places like East Timor, Papua New Guinea. But ultimately, we realized, look, to end extreme poverty is much more than a few charity night dinners. This is going to be systemic. We need governments, we need the private sector, we need everyone. But, poverty can be such a complex, multifaceted issue. We felt, what's a great story that is really easy to understand, very concrete, very tangible. And we met a group of Rotarians back in 2011. It was my penultimate year of education at UWA. And they told us about the issue of polio eradication. And they said, polio was this disease that once maimed and killed hundreds of thousands of children every year. And it had been 99% eradicated and reduced to these 4 countries: Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, and Nigeria. And I remember just thinking, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if you could eradicate this disease entirely? What a great way to show, what we can achieve. What a great way to show that the end of extreme poverty more broadly is possible. And in Perth in 2011, there was this big gathering of world leaders. It was the last time the Queen came to Australia for this Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. It's actually taken place, funnily enough, this week in Rwanda. But Perth was hosting it. And of the 4 countries which were polio endemic, 3 of them were from these Commonwealth, 3 of them were polio, 3 of them were from the Commonwealth. And we thought, wow, usually these summits and gatherings of world leaders are a talk fest. They get the photo with the Queen, everyone goes home, and they don't achieve much. We thought maybe this could be a summit in which we end polio, and it's the turning point. And it was a great Australian story, because we found out it was an Australian in the 70s that had launched the effort to eradicate polio. And so through a fluke, Julia Gillard, as then Prime Minister, was hosting this meeting. We managed to get a meeting with her, and she said something that was very profound. She said, I'm interested in supporting, but I need help. And I think what she was hinting at is, we tend to think our politicians can snap their fingers and everything will be all right. But essentially what she was saying is, I need permission to spend what is in the end our money. And we thought, well, what a great way to demonstrate public support, and that there's interest in this, and maybe do a concert, bring people together for the end of polio. And so we launched this campaign, and quite quickly, supporters jumped on, and you could write a book on that 6 months alone about what we did to launch the campaign. But yeah, ultimately resulted in John Legend flying all the way around the world to join us. He spent more time flying than he did here on the ground. And the next day after that concert, we were invited to a meeting with Julia Gillard, and she announced $50 million to polio eradication. And I honestly didn't think I would do anything beyond that for, I'd stay working here in Perth. But a lot of people in America saw our model. They said, this is interesting. You kind of got pop meets policy, bringing these two worlds together. Maybe there's something, you could do on the other side of the world. And so that we got some funding, we started, and 9 months after that, we were standing on the great lawn of Central Park with Neil Young and the Foo Fighters for what was the first Global Citizen Festival. And this year will mark 10 years of doing that in Central Park. And the rest is history.
Wow, what a story. That's phenomenal. You're making such a huge impact. It's really inspiring. So what is the mission of Global Citizen ultimately?
So our mission is a world without extreme poverty, and we believe that citizens, people, are at the core of the solution to end poverty. And the reason why we believe that is if you accept that poverty, no amount of charity gala nights, dinners is going to end extreme poverty, that it's a structural issue, we need policymakers, businesses, then you look back at history, all the big structural issues from apartheid to slavery, it's always been social movements of citizens and people using their voices to shift and persuade leaders to make the changes needed in the world. And for us, we say, well, what's going to motivate citizens? And so we use popular culture, music, to engage people, get people activated. And then we also give them a means to take action and use their voice.
And what's the biggest challenge that you've been facing on that mission, do you think?
Look, I mean, I think the challenges are varied, right? During the pandemic, we've become known for hosting some of the largest music festivals in the world with a social cause. Obviously, 2020 comes along, you can't host live events. And so we had to pivot early on. We worked with Lady Gaga. We did a 2-hour globally broadcast event in over 150 countries with some amazing artists, everyone from Paul McCartney to Elton John, through to younger, newer artists like Billie Eilish, and we mobilized $127 million for the World Health Organization, so it could purchase masks, PPE equipment, for health workers on the front lines, particularly in developing communities. And so in the last 2.5 years, during the pandemic, even though we weren't able in many cases to do big live events with people, we were able to actually figure out a way to reach millions more people than we previously did around the world, and work with some phenomenal artists, people on the front lines as well. And so, you have these challenges, and I think it's always like how you react and how you pivot. And I think, we have just over 100 staff around the world, and they're some of the hardest, most dedicated, passionate working people I know. And, everyone was affected by COVID in some shape, way, or form, but everyone in our team just stepped up, was being nimble, being agile, so that we could respond.
So that's, yeah. So how have you, this is the first company you've done this with. You've got over 100 staff globally. You're working with celebrities, royalty. You're flying back and forth. How have you picked up all of these skills along the way? Do you still have mentors? How have you managed to grow with the organization?
Yeah, I think one of the things which I learned very early on, and I said this to these students yesterday at UWA, is, it's really important when you're starting an organization, and I think not just starting but ongoing, is to realize what you don't know. And I think a lot of founders of organizations run into dramas because they they almost see it as they're fearful that it's a sign of weakness when you put up your hand and say, I need help here. And I remember being in the car park at UWA, if you take the idea of that concert, pretty much saying, listen, I know what we need, I just don't know how to do it, right? And that's not because it was in the case of organizing a concert. I had never really organized events before. I had been president of a social club at UWA, had organized a sausage sizzle. People would come along, seeing what a disaster it was of all these cold sausages, and promptly walked off in the other direction. And so I think it's always being able to admit if you don't know how to do something and having that humility. And sometimes you have to check yourself. You have to say, wait, before I go out and do this, let me just ask for a second opinion. And I think sometimes things can be so urgent, we're rushing, that we don't ask for second opinions, or we don't recognize when we need help. And that's when mistakes are made. And usually I've found that when I've slowed down just a little bit to run something past someone, ask for a second opinion, the solution that you're working on ultimately gets better. And so, for me, it's, not having any shame whatsoever in asking for help, asking for that second opinion. And I think that's just as important today as it was 10 years ago.
And I'm curious from a marketing perspective. A lot of the guys in my audience are in marketing. I run a LinkedIn marketing agency, so social media is particularly of interest. I'm curious to hear from your side how you leverage off of social media. You've got all these things happening, all these events. You're working with all these big names that have huge followings. How do you use that as part of your overall strategy at Global Citizen? Could you just speak to that for a couple of minutes?
Yeah, honestly, social media today, we were discussing this a few weeks ago. Social media today is what broadcast was 15, 20 years ago, right? When you create content today, yes, you can make it for once in a moment broadcast opportunity. But if you take our events, right, it's great if we can get it broadcast on terrestrial TV and it's live and people watch it, but most people aren't watching it live. It's what you do with that content, how you produce it, how you might slice and dice it, and how you might promote that. And, really as an advocate, and a campaigner, you can't expect people to come to you because people live their lives in multiple dimensions. They're busy. You've got to go to where people are at. It's part of the reason why we used music to recognize that was what people were interested in. How do we engage them on their platform? So, I think it's only becoming increasingly important. And how do you be really targeted in your audience with your content? So on the one hand, it's how we galvanize, how we get people engaged in our mission. The other thing I would say is it's also important in terms of how we engage political and business leaders. All of these leaders have social media channels. It's, if you like, how they use the yardstick to measure what's important to their citizens, their constituencies. So it's also important in not just how we meet people and get them engaged, but also how we show policymakers, business leaders, that this is an issue that their stakeholders care about, and this is why they need to be paying attention. So for us, it's important. Like whenever we're engaging with a leader, we're aware that I'm constantly looking at, okay, is this leader who's getting all these messages on this issue, are we actually cutting through the noise, penetrating and putting this issue on the radar, whether that's about vaccine equity, whether it's about climate change, whether it's about women and girls, the principle is still the same.
Yeah. With all the things that you're working on, so many different issues, and with such a huge team, how do you manage your time? Like, I'm curious to hear from you. Like, if you've got any tips for people trying to manage their time better, whether it's work-life balance or just literally balancing how much effort you spend in with the team and I'm just curious to hear from your perspective how you manage that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm by no means perfect. So if anyone's got any ideas, I would, I would love that. Especially, when I started 10 years ago, it was just me. Now I'm about to get married. So, how do you
Oh,
carve off that?
congratulations.
And for me, it's not just about doing activities as well. I think when you're invested in an organization, it's where your mind is at as well. And so I can, just because I'm not working, like doing something, my mind can easily be working as well. And so, how one does that, I mean, it's down to individuals. What I find works really well is making lists. And what I've struggled with in the past is to be present, particularly in personal life matters when you're stressed about fundraising budgets. How am I going to do these things? And what I found is if I think of something, I will put in, I use Apple Notes many times a day. And I find that if I write it in a list, it allows me to release that from my mind and be present somewhere. And I think being present is key. But I would say writing lists is something. Even back in last year of high school, I would write lists of all my assignments, things I would need to do, and I would find it would just take it from your mind and take that stress out of your mind. And I also think it gives you then the gratification of deleting stuff from the lists as well. So that's how I use. But yeah, my biggest struggle is being mentally present in when you've got so much going on.
Yeah, and how have you found the transition to a bigger team? Have you found it easy to delegate?
I you know what I think so. I think there's delegation, but then there's also the support that comes with giving someone a task as well. And it's getting the balance right, supporting someone so that they can learn, that they can do it themselves. But certainly, early on, for any leader, I think that's hard when you've been doing everything and you've grown a team to let things go. But eventually you reach a point where, as soon as you start doing that, you realize that it means you can expand to other opportunities. And what I find is if I'm spending a lot of my time executing on tasks, which I know how to do, you're not learning anything new. You're not challenging yourself, but also you're not expanding, you're not growing. And so delegation is super important. And again, it was having mentors who would say, you need to, when you're a C-suite of an organization, you need to be a delegator in chief. And if you're spending all your time executing, then there's a problem there. You're not giving people below you the space to grow as leaders in their own right, and you yourself aren't growing either.
Yeah, huge. What are you most excited about that you're working on at the moment?
Well, this year will mark our 10th anniversary, back on the Great Lawn of Central Park. And I'm super excited that we will also be bringing Global Citizen, the festival. I mean, we have a strong office in Africa, but we'll be bringing it to Ghana, the West Coast. So September 24th, we will have the Black Star Square in Accra, which is amazing, overlooks the Atlantic Ocean, just very beautiful. Wow. The same day as Central Park. We'll be announcing the lineup shortly, but it's going to be phenomenal. And this will mark the 65th anniversary of Ghanaian independence, 20th anniversary of the African Union, bringing the world to Africa, but also Africa to the world. And it's going to be what I hope an extraordinary cultural, iconic moment, but also hopefully the plan is to mobilize plenty of commitments and support. But that'll be September 24th. Yeah.
Okay. And so is that what's next for the organization? Just more events and growing and expanding and making more of an impact?
So for us, it's also, as we've learned how to do events, it's also, how do we pivot and try new formats as well? And so during the pandemic, when we couldn't do the festival, for instance, we got involved in voter registration in the US. And it was like, okay, how do we use our network of artists to engage people and educate them on the importance to vote? So we've got a number of things in the pipeline right now. We're looking at working with a number of young creators in Africa and in America, and giving other young creators, now that we've got this big audience, the opportunity to engage the audience and tell the story. How do we be a platform for the next generation of leaders as well? And also, I think, we're at a crossroads as a global society, in terms of the pandemic. When you speak to many leaders in developing communities, many of them there's broken trust. Many of them were back of the queue waiting for vaccines to come to them while the rich world hoarded the vaccines. And so I think for us, there's this conversation to be had about, how we structure the world, our global institutions, the United Nations, the World Bank. How do we make them more representative and accountable to the needs of the poorest, marginalized citizens? How do we give representatives of these communities a seat at the table? And so I think that conversation, needs to be had. And I think Global Citizen is a platform to have that conversation as well. And it's very much saying, okay, let's not look through this as just a charitable endeavor. How do we look at it through a justice and equity lens as well? And what does that mean? The world has largely been the same since the end of the Second World War. What does that mean for all of these institutions as well? So I think for Global Citizen, it's very much how we adjust and be a platform for those conversations and a new type of dialogue. Yeah.
Yeah. What sort of changes do you think need to be made on the political front in order for us to get closer to this mission of yours?
I think honestly, you look at the so-called Bretton Woods institutions. You've got the World Bank, you've got the IMF. I think many of these institutions, need to be more representative. They need to give people a seat at the table if we're to respond to these issues, not just the pandemic, but climate change as well. So one of the things I've been asking for is a citizens conference on global governance. President Zelensky, when he was addressing the UN Security Council, called it out, and he said, this is broken. If you can't stop a war in the 21st century, this is broken. But it's not just on what's going on in Russia and Ukraine and the knock-on effect on food systems and the rising cost of food around the world, which is going to push millions of people back into extreme poverty. You can apply it to climate change. You can apply it to healthcare injustice as well. And so I think, where we stand right now, actually listening to leaders from many of these countries, they actually have the solutions themselves. In Africa, they've said, we've spent so many years getting loans from Western countries at high rates. And during the pandemic, we found ourselves paying more in interest than we did on the healthcare of our own citizens. We're not going to do that anymore. We're going to work together as one big community, and we're going to raise our own funds. And they said, can you help us with that? And so I think what needs to happen is to actually meet and listen to many of these leaders on what needs to be done. And I also think we can't rely on government alone. In the US, you saw some of the biggest increases in wealth in years. You've got $1 trillion sat in private foundations just sitting idle. This is money that could be deployed. If the cost of ending extreme poverty is $350 billion a year, and you can't rely on government, well, what is the role of philanthropy? What is the role of the private sector? And we need everyone to step up at the same time, and not just rely on government alone.
Yeah. Wow, that's huge. Yeah, we all need to be doing more. Listening to you talk, I'm thinking I'm not doing enough here.
Well,
Michael,
good news,
sorry?
good news is, I was just going to say, good news with a lot of these is we actually know what could be done.
Yes.
We have the resources there. You know, I throw out something like $350 billion a year to end extreme poverty. It sounds like a lot. It is half of what the US spends on military each year. The US spends $750 billion on its military, right? If you look at how much we spend on fossil fuel subsidies, again, that is hundreds of billions of dollars. So it sounds like a tough challenge, but it's actually not. It's really a matter of priority.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can the people listening go to learn more about what you're doing?
So, you know, they can head to globalcitizen.org. We put, you know, a bunch of content on there, really easy, simple to read, breaks down all of these issues into really digestible content pieces. It also outlines how people can use their voice, how they can help. There's actions you can take, and there's also cool rewards you can learn. You can win as well. You know, concert tickets, other types of gifts as well to learn. But yeah, sign up and be a global citizen.
What are some of the ways that we can help?
So essentially, right now, if you're in Australia, we're calling on the new government. We've got 5 asks for the new Albanese government. One of the biggest opportunities for Australia to demonstrate leadership will be in a few months' time on the Global Fund to fight HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. These 3 diseases, especially tuberculosis, you know, you look at the Pacific, during the pandemic, they saw a resurgence because we were rightly dealing with a pandemic, but all of these other diseases are still there. You know, we need test treatments for all of them. And so we're asking Australia to step up, be a generous nation, and address these issues. And so you can register to be a global citizen. You can contact your local member of parliament. You can contact the new foreign minister, Penny Wong, and encourage Australia to be generous. In other ways, you can look at how you can be an active citizen on climate change. There's lots of ways how you can get involved. A big thing is actually asking businesses to step up and slash their emissions as well. And then there's ways you can learn more. We've got quizzes on there. We've got plenty of information, and you know, we try and make it fun as well. So there's rewards you can sign. You know, you can win by signing up and earning points as well.
Brilliant. Well, I know you're very busy while you're back here in Perth. I really appreciate you spending the time. I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to see what you accomplish over the next 10 years and following along with your story. But I appreciate your time, Michael. Thanks very much for being with us today.
No, thanks for having me. This has been great. And yeah, don't hesitate to get in contact if there's anything I can do to support or help out. But thanks for giving us a platform.
Thank you.